Cake Boss was the best show. Buddy liked one of my Instagram posts once. I think I jumped for joy. Hey everyone, I'm Nia. Welcome back to another episode of Recipe Drop. Today we're making a classic Swedish strawberry and cream cake, but making it a little bit more 4th of July appropriate by also adding blueberries. It's a summer favorite and it's made with a really light cake that actually gets most of its structure from whipped eggs and sugar. Then we're filling it with pastry cream and strawberry jam and decorating it with fresh berries and lots of whipped cream. For the cake, I also use a 3-cup method, which makes it even more achievable and straightforward, and its components can be made in advance for you to easily assemble at the last minute. It's one of my all-time favorite cakes, and I'm really excited to show you how to make it. So for this cake, you can either do the 3-cup method, which I mentioned before, or if you're really particular and if you have a kitchen scale, you can just use a scale as well, because in the recipe, I do have the weight measured out as well. For the 3-cup method, you want 3 cups that are exactly the same. It's really important that they're tall because it just makes it easier to see if the ingredients are lined up. And you also want them to be clear. You kind of want to start off with the eggs because that's going to be where you're going to get the rest of the measurements from, if that makes sense. So here I have 5 large eggs. Usually a large egg weighs about 57 grams. When I've measured out my eggs, I've gotten about 278 grams. So that's kind of where I go off of. But the best thing about this method is that even if the weight is a little bit off, your recipe is gonna come out really good as long as all the ingredients kind of are measured out the same. It's also important that the eggs are at room temperature. All right, so I'm gonna pour in the sugar. I'm gonna use a spoon. Okay, a little more. And I really like this method because it makes it really easy to remember. And also if you don't have a scale or if you don't have measuring cups, it's just a really easy way to do it. Does that look good? Cool, we're on to the flour. It's important that you use a spoon to kind of scoop the flour into the cup because if you kind of just pack it in there, you're gonna end up with more flour than you need, and that's gonna affect the overall texture of the cake. And this is also all-purpose flour. Carefully adding the flour, and I wanna level it out without kind of compacting it too much. What do you think? From your angle, does it look good? Yeah? All right. Now that we have all the ingredients measured out, I'm also gonna add 2 teaspoons of baking powder to the flour. So as I mentioned before, most of the structure in the leavening is gonna come from the whipped eggs and sugar. So you don't technically need the baking powder, but the baking powder just adds an extra layer of insurance, which is important, especially since we're gonna be adding a decent amount of filling to the cake. Into an electric mixer, gonna add the eggs in with the sugar. So now I'm gonna beat this on high speed for about 10 to 15 minutes. When you think it's done, keep whipping a little bit longer. You want to get as much air as you possibly can in there. We're gonna make the custard, so I'm actually gonna move this somewhere else because it's pretty loud. Okay, so now we're gonna move on to the vanilla custard. So we're gonna start off adding 3 egg yolks to a medium-sized bowl. Making this cake, over the last few weeks, I've gone through an insane amount of eggs, and I have so much leftover egg white that I really don't want to throw away, so I have to figure out something to do with it. 3 egg yolks, and I'm also gonna add 1/4 of a cup of white sugar and a 1.5 tablespoons of cornstarch. This is gonna help to really thicken the pastry cream. Sometimes you don't have to add cornstarch, especially if you were serving it more as like a vanilla pudding, but since we're adding it to a cake and you want it to kind of have a little bit more structure, it's pretty important to add another thickening agent. So I have a small medium saucepan, and here I have a cup of milk, a cup of whole milk, so around 150 grams. So I'm gonna warm this up until it's pretty hot, but not yet boiling. Now I'm gonna mix the egg yolks, sugar, and cornstarch together. You don't really have to mix this too long. I'm just mixing it until some of the sugar has dissolved and obviously all the cornstarch clumps are gone. I also usually tend to look for it to be able to kind of fall down in ribbons and for it to look a little bit like silky smooth. Ooh, 160, it's going up, it's going up, it's going. Yeah. All right, I gotta take it off the heat. Okay, so what we're gonna do now is slowly pour in the milk into the egg yolk mixture while continuously whisking. And what we're doing here is we're tempering the eggs, which is partially cooking them before we add them back into the saucepan. Oops. And you wanna do this quickly. I just find this method is always like a foolproof way of making vanilla custard. Make sure to keep stirring because otherwise the egg yolk is gonna cook. Okay, now I'm gonna return this to the saucepan. I have the heat on low heat and I'm just gonna continuously stir, getting into all the crevices until the pastry cream is nice and thick. And this is gonna take about 5 to 8 minutes. But yeah, make sure not to leave the stove because it happens really quickly and the egg yolks get too hot without stirring. They're gonna curdle and you're gonna end up with a really clumpy pastry cream. This is kind of an example of what a lot of Swedish cakes are like. Usually you won't find them with a lot of American like buttercream frosting. It's usually almost always like a pastry cream or whipped cream or something like that. And it's definitely my favorite kind of cake. Okay, it's getting really thick, and when you notice it starts to thicken the slightest bit, make sure to just keep stirring pretty fast. So once it's thick like this, remove it from the heat, and now we're gonna stir in 1 tablespoon of cold butter. So the thicker we let it get on the stove, the thicker it's gonna get once it's cooled, and the easier it's gonna be to assemble the cake later. Okay, so I'm gonna add also about a teaspoon of vanilla bean paste. You could use vanilla extract as well. I'm also adding about 1/8 of a teaspoon salt, so a generous pinch. So good. I could drink vanilla custard. I'm actually just gonna pour it right back into this bowl that we used before because the residual heat from this is gonna cook any egg yolk that's left over in this bowl. And then it's gonna cool here until we're ready to assemble the cake. I'm gonna stir in the egg yolk that was left in the bowl. I'm also gonna place a little bit of plastic wrap right on the surface. You could use parchment paper too, but this is just to prevent any skin from forming on top. And it's definitely not hot enough to melt it, so don't worry. So I'm gonna let this cool at room temperature until we're ready to assemble. Should we go check on the cake? No, on the eggs? That's what I'm trying to say. So this looks pretty good. You can see it falls into thick ribbons, and that's exactly what we want. But as I said before, if you're not sure, keep whisking because you really can't overwhip this. So I'm using a 9-inch springform pan. It's really important that you use a springform pan. It's just gonna make it a lot easier to remove the cake and get it to bake the way you want it to. Like to just do it this way. This one is a little bit trickier in particular. I'm gonna cut off the excess. I like doing it this way because I just find it annoying to just try and cut a perfect circle. So with the sheet, I'm just cutting this in half lengthwise, and we're gonna line the sides. And I know it looks really tall, but that's on purpose. The point here is to try to get the cake to rise above the line of the springform pan. So first I'm gonna butter the sides just to act as glue for the parchment paper. Making sure that the uncut edge is on the bottom, just so that it aligns really nicely. I'm gonna place it inside like this. We probably don't need quite this much height. There's no way the cake is gonna rise that much, but always better to have more than less. And I like to just put a little butter here at the top too, just to glue the tops together. Now we can finish the rest of the batter. Okay, so now we're gonna sift in the flour and the baking powder and salt as well, and we're gonna fold it really gently until everything is nice and combined. So I'm just gonna go in figure eights and gently fold it in. And the key here is to try to mix as little as you possibly can while also mixing in all the flour, because ultimately all the air bubbles that we've worked so hard to mix in is what's gonna give the cake its height. But you do kind of get sneaky flour pockets, and that's really important to avoid because here, see right there? If you end up with that in the cake, you're gonna get this whole piece in the cake that's gonna be dry and lumpy, and the cake is just not gonna rise the way you want it to. All right, so now I'm just going all the way down to the bottom to triple check that we don't have any flour pockets left. And now we have a really nice and thick, but really fluffy batter. So you can see it falls into really thick ribbons. All right, now I'm just gonna pour it into the cake pan. So there are a few key factors to making sure that this cake comes out the way you want it to, and that is not using too much flour, which if you do this method, I'm sure it'll turn out great, and also not baking it at too high of a temperature. Either of those can actually result in the cake folding in the center And that is the last thing we want, especially since we're trying to cut the cake into 3 equal layers. So I've preheated the oven to 325 degrees. Lower is better for this recipe, and we're gonna bake it for about 40 minutes. Look at how like airy and fluffy it is. And it is crazy that a cake can get that much structure from just whipped eggs and sugar. You wanna preheat the oven with the oven rack placed on the bottom third because you wanna make sure that there's enough room for the large amount of parchment paper that we have. All right, we'll see you after the cake's done. Okay, so just to make this go a little faster, I actually made this cake yesterday, and the other one that we just made is still in the oven. So I did also let this cool upside down, but it's important to prevent the cake from kind of collapsing in the center. And you can see I let the cake cool with the parchment paper on. It's not necessarily necessary to cut this into 3 even layers. Make sure you have a serrated knife. It makes a world of difference. So I like to start with the top layer. So I'm gonna cut, and you can kind of move the cake as you go to kind of cut like an outline around the side first. And you can see that it did dip a little bit in the center, but that's kind of inevitable with a cake like this. But that's okay, we're still gonna get 3 really nice layers. All right. Beautiful. You can see that this method of mainly using the whipped sugar and eggs produces a really sturdy and light cake. All right, on to layer 2 and layer 3. And the interesting thing about this cake is that usually you would think that you'd need fat, so dairy or butter, to make a cake, but actually the egg yolks provide enough fat in this cake. All right, so we have our 3 layers. Now we can assemble. I have a pound of strawberries, so 16 ounces. I am gonna leave some of the smaller ones halved or whole. If you have ones that are even smaller than this, leave them whole because I think it looks really cute, but these are actually really big strawberries. So some of these I'm gonna cut into little pieces, and the rest I'm gonna cut into halves, quarters. I don't know, it's kind of fun to have different sizes, I think. So I also just washed these strawberries, so I put a paper towel down in the bottom of the bowl just to soak up any extra water from washing them. This one is massive. These are some GMO strawberries. So I cut some into really small pieces, and now I'm cutting a few of them just in half, and then a few into just slices like this. Okay, so now I'm gonna whip a pint of heavy whipping cream. It's important that it's cold because cold heavy cream is gonna whip up a lot faster than if it's warm, and it's also gonna hold its shape. You're also gonna end up with more whipped cream than if you were to use warm heavy cream. So I'm gonna whip this until it's soft peaks, because what happens is that once we work with it and once we're decorating the cake and once the whipped cream sits, it's gonna start to harden. So if we start with stiff peaks, the whipped cream is gonna start to separate and almost get buttery as we decorate. So actually, once I see it start to thicken, I'm gonna add a little bit of the pastry cream, which is gonna help to stabilize the whipped cream and make it last a little bit longer. I'm gonna take off this layer of plastic wrap, and you can see no skin. So I'm now noticing that the cream is starting to thicken up a little bit. You can start to see that the whisk is leaving slight trails. So I'm gonna add just about 1/4 of a cup of the pastry cream. There we go. And now I'm gonna keep whipping until we have nice, light, fluffy, light peaks. All right, so we have some nice, soft peaks here. It's still a little bit runny, but it still holds a little bit of shape. Okay, now to assemble, I'm gonna assemble it on this cake plate from AO Glass. It's actually my parents' glass one company, but I love this one. I love that it comes in a few different colors as well. So I just cut out a few pieces of parchment paper, and I'm gonna place these kind of along the cake plate. And this is just gonna help us decorate without getting the cake plate too dirty. And splitting it up into several different pieces is also gonna make it really easy to just pull right under the cake. And with this cake, it's also typical that you add a layer of strawberry jam in between. You could also use raspberry if that's what you want. I'm just using pre-made store-bought jam for ease's sake. Don't be shy. Add a generous dollop and then spread it out all over the cake. And this is really gonna get soaked up by the cake layer, and it's gonna taste amazing. All right, going in with half of the remaining custard. It might be tempting to use all of it in one, but don't do that because if you have too thick of a layer, it's gonna seep through the layers and out onto the sides. Second layer. And then another layer of strawberry jam. So in total, we're probably using about a half a cup of strawberry jam. More vanilla custard. I actually might not use all of it for this. And then last cake layer, making sure that the bottom or the uncut side is facing upwards. So to decorate, I actually also have some blueberries and I have sliced almonds. Do you think we have enough? I don't know. But this I'm gonna use to kind of put on the sides, which is gonna add just a really nice texture because of the crunch and it also looks beautiful. And now I'm just gonna dollop it or pour it right on top. Add it all, make a big nice pile on top. So I like to just spread it out over the top and then kind of go like this so that it falls over to the sides. So I'm just spreading it out really gently with the spatula here. I'm just gonna go in and just make it look a little bit neater. Okay, it looks a little bit better. It's not perfect, but whipped cream, it's hard to get it super smooth. So I'm just cupping them in my hand right here, and then I'm just gonna go up along the sides and press it into the cream. And I like doing it over a baking sheet because then it just catches all the almonds, and then you can just scoop them up and keep adding them to the cake. You also do see a lot of cakes decorated like this in Swedish bakeries. I think it's so pretty. So now I'm gonna pull out the little parchment pieces. So there we go. We decorated the cake without getting the cake plate dirty at all. Strawberries, blueberries, mint. I'm just gonna place these kind of just like organically on top of the cake. I feel like that's always the prettiest way. It's nice to kind of just let things fall sometimes. All right, you can add some blueberries before I cover it completely with strawberries. Extra berries are never an issue. I feel like they always get eaten. And this is where it's nice to have different piece sizes, is it just makes it easier to decorate and kind of cover the whole thing without feeling like you're really overloading. I'm gonna finish it off with a few mint leaves. My parents are really big into gardening and they used to plant a lot of mint, but I guess mint is one of those things that kind of takes over, so they had to stop because we were getting way too much mint. There you go. Super delicious, classic Swedish summer strawberry berries and cream cake. That was a lot, but it actually lasts pretty well in the fridge, so you could make it the day in advance, and it's gonna taste just as good, if not better, the next day, I promise. And I've never met a person who doesn't love this cake. I'm dying to try it. The tricky thing with this is not smushing the berries when you cut into the cake, so it's important to use a sharp knife. It's gonna be a nice thick slice. Nice. That looks delicious. I love that you can see all the layers. You can see the vanilla pastry cream and the strawberry jam, and then the very generous amount of whipped cream on top, but it's important. You don't want to skimp on the whipped cream. And again, you'll notice that I did leave some of the strawberry stems on. I think it just looks really pretty, and you can eat them. Sometimes I do, but you can also just like pick them off when you're eating the cake. This is how I feel like I've gotten it served when I'm in Sweden, and I just think it looks nice and organic. I'm so excited to take a bite, and these forks that I'm gonna use are actually from Genza. They're the Nobel Dinner Collection, and it comes in a whole set. We sell them in our shop, and fun fact, tons of these actually get stolen every year at the Nobel Dinner. It's a funny story. If you want more information, Paul actually made a video about it on our socials recently. I actually might take one. These are really nice. I'm gonna go from the front. Gotta get a berry in there too. This is crazy. This is literally summer in a cake. It's so good. And the custard and the strawberry jam really soak up into the cake. If you know me at all, you know I love whipped cream. You should definitely make this. If you do, let me know. If you want the recipe, you can find it in the description linked below. Like, comment, subscribe, and I will see you in the next video.